So let's take the red pill here and go through some of this. So first of all, the United States exists in two forms. The original United States has been usurped by a corporation called the United States Corporation, which was incorporated in the District of Columbia in 1871. Now, the first kind of public expression we have from government that this kind of exists was this Supreme Court case in 1901. Marshall Harlan was a Supreme Court justice. This was a dissenting opinion in a case called Downs versus Bidwell. This is what he says in there. Very, very interesting. The idea prevails with some. Indeed, it found expression in arguments at the bar. In other words, this idea that he's going to state here has been discussed in the courts among the legal community, that we have in this country substantially or practically two national governments. One to be maintained under the Constitution and with all its restrictions, and the other to be maintained by Congress outside and independently of that instrument, which he goes on to say would be just like all the other nations on the earth, without restrictions and without attachment to higher law. And he says in there that if that were to happen, he feels it would be very bad because it would, we'd go from an era of constitutional liberty guarded and protected by a written constitution into an era of legislative absolutism. But I think this is a very important thing to see because a Supreme Court justice is talking about this. So this was starting to be implemented more and more at that time. So let's go through some of the timelines here. 1788, the United States was officially bankrupt. 1790, Article 1 of the U.S. Statutes at Large, pages 138 to 178, abolished the states of the Republic and created federal district, corporations, and made us corporations, made us corporate citizens. It's a different status than an individual sovereign human being. So this started way back. Now the impact of it didn't come in until much, much later, but it started back then. 1845, Congress passed legislation that would ultimately allow common law to be usurped by admiralty law. Again, common law is based in natural law or divine law. It's non-changing. It's a higher law. And admiralty law is corporate law. It's changing. It's like ruler's law. It can be changed by whoever's in charge. So that didn't immediately take place, but the first step was in 1845. 1860 was a very, very important time. In 1860, when the South left the Union, there was not a quorum. The Congress could not legally meet. So what did they do? 1861, Lincoln declared a national emergency and martial law, which gave the president unprecedented powers. That, by the way, has never been, I've actually read a Senate report on this. And this one and the Roosevelt did the similar thing in 33. Those have never been repealed, and that Senate report verifies that. I read that at the Continental Congress because we were doing, I was on the committee for the War Powers Act. 1863, the Lieber Code was established, taking away your property and your rights. So this was the first step in basically taking our property in order to get out of bankruptcy with the bankers. And at this step here, it was the public lands that were used as collateral. From 1864 to 1867, several Reconstruction Acts were passed, forcing the states to ratify the 14th Amendment, which made everyone slaves. If you read the 14th Amendment and you go back there, it talks about privileges, not rights, but privileges. Instead of really freeing the blacks and the slaves, it made all of us slaves. In 1871, the United States became a corporation with a new constitution and a new corporate government. This is when the incorporation took place in District of Columbia. In 1917, the Trading with the Enemy Act, this is a very important thing, was passed. Now, in 1917, it was done because we were at war, in World War I. It was passed so that we could confiscate the lands of our enemies. And it made anybody who was in the country who owned land and was part of Germany or Italy or the other countries we were fighting, it classified them as enemy combatants. Well, in 1933, Roosevelt wanted to confiscate all of our gold. The way that they could legally do that was by reclassifying every single person in this country as an enemy combatant. And that's exactly what they did. And that remains the case today. We are classified, all of us, as enemy combatants. And they then also collateralized the private lands of the people, a lien, and they borrowed money against our private lands. And that's when property taxes started. We don't own our land. Just try this experiment. Don't pay your property taxes for 3 months and see who ends up with your land. If you owned your land, you wouldn't have to pay taxes on it, and you wouldn't be able to have the government confiscate it at the point of a gun, which is what they can do. 1944, Washington, D.C. was deeded to the International Monetary Fund, IMF, by the Bretton Woods Agreement. The IMF is made up of extremely wealthy problem that own most of the banking industries of the world. You can go back to that picture I showed you earlier. The same people, Morgans, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Warburgs, and others. Congress, the IRS, and the President work for the IMF. The IRS is not a U.S. government agency. It's an agency of the International Monetary Fund. Our elected officials are supposed to operate under limits of their own, of their oath of office to uphold the U.S. state constitutions, but they ignore that. Our founding fathers look, and by the way, there's many instances. It used to be a few years ago. You weren't sure about this, but now you can go to courts all the time and you can hear the judges actually say, if somebody tries to bring up the Constitution in defense, the Constitution does not apply here. They will say that. Our founding fathers look back to history for precedent. What they found was a Magna Carta, the Great Charter of Freedoms. It set a precedent that changed the face of England forever by establishing that the king was not above the law. The common law is very different from statutory law. Now, I've mentioned that statutory law is ruler's law. The ruler can change the law anytime they want. In our country, whoever's in power can change the laws, and whoever's in power the next election, they can change it back. When that happens, people can't make decisions. That's one of the main reasons people are leaving this country with their manufacturing and their industry, because they don't know what law is coming next. Who's going to be in charge? It's just not a stable environment to do business in. Now, I want to mention this book. It's called Whatever Happened to Justice by Richard Maybury. After you read Common Sense Revisited, which I hope you'll read, but by the way, you're all going to get a copy of that if you don't already have it tonight for free. You can buy more for $1 a copy and give them to your friends. I have hundreds of copies here. The next book should be this one, in my opinion. Whatever Happened to Justice by Richard Maybury. He explains the source of common law. He explains the difference between common law and ruler's law, and what the founders were thinking when they created our country. It's just an awesome, awesome book. Very well researched, easy to understand. He wrote all of his books so that an 8th grade level educated person could understand them very clearly. So very powerful. I'm on my second reading on this. I carry it with me. It's a fantastic book. And basically what he says is that over hundreds of years, the common law was reduced to 2 fundamental principles. Do all that you have agreed to do, and do not encroach on other persons or their property. As long as you follow those rules, you're okay. When you break those rules, then something has to be done, and restitution needs to be paid. Now, another neat thing about common law is there is no crime if there is no victim. Think about that for a minute. How many people are we locking up every single day, putting in a jail, putting in a cage to live years of their lives that have never harmed anyone? All those people should be released. And they will be once we repopulate this republic. People who have not harmed another person, have not stolen from another person, they will be released. And a lot more of the people that are in there that could be paying restitution to their victims, but we're locking them up. And not only do we not get repaid if we've been harmed by somebody, but we have to pay to feed them. What is it, $70,000, $80,000 a year, I think? Something like that. $70,000 to $80,000 a year it costs to put a person in prison and pay for them. taxpayer money. And those people could be out, if they're nonviolent, they could be out paying restitution to whoever they've harmed. That should be done, and that will be done under the Republic. Our jails will be maybe 10% of the people that are in there will be in there. And the rest of the people will be out leading productive lives. If they've been violent or they threaten violence, they may have to stay in jail. Just a couple things here on power and government. Our founders really, really understood. They studied power. They were all very, very concerned about keeping this republic a republic, protecting individual rights. They did everything they could that they knew to do. But they also understood that power corrupts, and power corrupts absolutely. But even more than that, what happens is, like this one quote here, the third one down, power attracts the corruptible. Absolute power attracts the absolutely corruptible. The more power a government entity has, the more it's going to attract people who want to use that power for their own benefit. And the founders understood this very clearly. That's why they wanted to keep state and federal government very, very small, because they knew if it was, the more it did, the more power it had, the more it would try to take over.